How's it, Mzansi? Welcome back to Farmers Inside Track, South Africa's most downloaded farmers podcast. My name is Patricia Tembo, your host, and today's episode is brought to you by Wieta. Today, through Wieta's Labour Desk, we're looking at how ethical wine begins with empowered workers. Here is my colleague Lisa Kanya Vena in conversation with Chirstone Hornsby, who is Programs Manager of Standards and Stakeholder Engagement at Wieta, as well as Abraham Daniels, who is the Labour and Projects Coordinator at the Wieta Labour Desk.
Welcome to Farmers Inside Track. To start, AB, can you explain what the Wieta Labour Desk is and what inspired its creation? The promo video describes it as a place for workers with concerns about their rights or working conditions. What was the main gap in the industry that it was designed to fill?
Thanks. Wieta is a multi-stakeholder organization that they have a board that consists of trade unions, civil society, wine brands, and producers. The creation of the Labour Desk was inspired through the unique position that Wieta finds itself as Wieta to actively promote fair and decent working conditions. So through that is where Wieta has seen that there's a gap that we need to fill as a Labour Desk so that we can hear the voice of the workers through their various grievances.
So, Chirstone, I'm going to bring you in now. The Fair and Safe Harvest campaign launch looks incredibly promising. Could you paint a picture for our listeners of the impact of the campaign on seasonal workers?
Thanks, Lisa, for that. What we had in mind with this campaign is Wieta undertakes training and capacity building initiatives year on year. And what we looked at is areas of risk where we don't have a substantial footprint and where we can address that risk. One of the areas of risk and one of the areas where we felt that capacity building may be of more impact and value and use is looking at seasonal workers coming into the harvest period. So if you looked at our campaign, we have a campaign trailer, which we've done with a couple of farms and Wieta members. What it looked at was the impact of this initiative. So what we've done is we've undertaken our capacity building training, which focused on labor and occupational health and safety training for seasonal workers. So during that time, we've had an engagement with a couple of our Wieta members already this year. We've had one last year as well between January and April, which is the harvest period. And what we've undertaken was to ensure that seasonal workers understand what their rights and responsibilities are in terms of the workplace. And we know that seasonal workers come and go, and that obviously leaves a bit of a gray area in terms of knowledge transfer. Might even be from the producer side, from our side as well. So what we've done is looked at empowering those seasonal workers and looked at areas where we see, okay, workers need to get capacitated in understanding their rights and responsibilities around labor conditions. So what we've done is we've embedded our knowledge base around labor conditions, and we've looked to capacitate our workers and Wieta members workers on, for example, payslips. What is all part of a payslip? And we looked at health and safety risk on sites. So these are some of the areas where we've looked at in terms of making it very practical for seasonal workers to understand, but also looking at their role within the value chain in terms of sustainability. What we've done is we've looked at the entire value chain and we've pitched, okay, where does seasonal workers' responsibilities lie in that value chain? Because it can have an impact on things if they don't understand labor conditions or health and safety. And for us, what is important is that every worker is a business partner in that value chain. And if they don't have the knowledge and expertise on their labor conditions or health and safety practices, it can have a cascading impact on the value chain because risks happen. Farm workers get hurt. There is maybe unfair labor practices. For us, it's important to transfer that knowledge to seasonal workers, especially during the time of harvest.
AB, in the campaign videos, workers mention learning specific things like how the My Payslip works, ethical rights, and how to work with pesticides. These are very practical skills. How do you decide on the curriculum for these trainings, and how are they delivered to workers across different farms?
It's important to know that for workers within the industry, they need to know their rights. So what we normally do, we normally benchmark our curriculum against what is happening within the labor market and in the change of the labor laws. So this is how we then proceed in fulfilling the curriculum through the various norms and standards, and also in terms of what Wieta prescribe in terms of their standards, but also against the backdrop of what the law also prescribe. This is how we then set up our curriculum in open session, face-to-face with workers. That is what we normally do, where we can go in, meet up with people and give them the training in a particular venue. It is agreed between us and the producer or the seller, and to give people insight of what is happening in the laws or what is their responsibility in terms of the laws that is prescribed for that particular sector. So for us, it is important to deliver to workers the basic needs, which they're not every day they are getting across to them in terms of how they operate, but they doesn't read the laws every day in terms of what is their rights. So for Wieta, it's important that workers should know their rights.
And AB, the feedback from workers with decades of experience is quite powerful. One cannot help but wonder, how do you approach training experienced workers, and what has been their general reaction to learning new formalized methods?
Remember, some workers know their rights, but might not know how to practically defend it when it comes to a particular matter of concern or a grievance that is happening. Even those with the experience, those workers attend sessions, and when they learn from us in terms of how we approach it with our engagement, we will always acknowledge that they have learned something new through our sessions. Because sometimes workers know they do have rights, but rights also comes with responsibilities. And this is how we position ourselves when we get into a particular seller or farm. Because it's good to know that you do have rights, but it's also to know that as a worker, you need to know that that right that you have a certain responsibility. Because rights at the end of the day, it's just given without also your line of communication. When you want to enact a particular right, what to do and how you need to do that. So out of that, it is important what we normally do is in our approach is to bring the different methods across so that workers can see where the difference lies in terms of knowing that I, as a worker, do have a sick leave of 30 days over the 3 years, but at the end of the day, how responsible do I act to also take those days? And what is the reason for the sick days? Is it for being sick? Or is it only for me because I know I have the days and I just need to take it? This is what we do in terms of making people responsible, in terms of knowing their rights, and also having the experience within the workplace. But at the end of the day, the new methods that we bring across in terms of what they have experienced and how they had approached it, we normally bring, because it's an open session. They give their answers to us when we ask them questions to hear them out in terms of how they have dealt with it in the past. And we bring new methods across for them to take into account as to how best can it help them and also assist them further into their workstations.
AB, the campaign aims to make farms places where voices are heard. Can you share a specific, maybe anonymized example of a concern raised through the Labour Desk hotline and how the process of investigation and resolution unfolded, leading to a positive outcome for the worker and all those involved?
The Wieta Labour Desk is there for any worker lots of complaint, even if the worker is working for a Wieta farm or a member or for a non-Wieta member. So when we receive complaints and the worker or the complainant on the other side asks to remain anonymous, we do appreciate that and we do pick up the needs of how the complaint need to be handled. So the desk itself, when we receive complaints, we will try to engage with the person they've sent the complaint so that we can have the substance in terms of where the complaint arises. And there's a form that need to be filled in from this person that give us a broader detail in terms of the area of the complaint, the farm which is coming from, the anonymous person. We'll say anonymous, its telephone number might be there, but we keep it always confidential within ourselves also. And that is how we then deal with the matter. Especially if it's a Wieta member, we will then be able to have a manner of how we then engage with the various seller or the farm where the complaint came from. What we normally do when it's a non-Wieta member, we will then refer the matter to the particular department or institution where we think this complaint needs to be allocated to. But if it's a Wieta member, as the labor desk, we then deal directly with the particular seller or farmer to attend and assist on the complaint. We will, as far as possible, if the worker or the complainant don't want to be named and want to remain anonymous, we do that and we don't divulge any information of that particular person. We will then deal with the matter professionally, speak on the subjects that is in there, and at the end of the day, say for instance, if it's complaints about people complaining they don't receive payslips, they don't receive maybe their safety equipment, they don't get any protection against the pesticides, or any type of complaints that came through, which we have dealt with over the past few years. So what we then do, we then engage with the particular producer or the seller or the farmer, and we then lead to us by sending, firstly, we send a letter to the particular farmer or seller. That seller will then respond to us on the letter, and based on the response that we're receiving, we will quickly pick up in terms of, do we need a further face-to-face engagement with this particular seller or producer or farm, or the response that they have given us in terms of the situation is of that substance that we can share it with the particular anonymous complainer, and that complainer can say to us yes or no, there's still further stuff that need to be dealt with. So we are doing that. So for us, the best way how we try to manage this process is to address the complaint that the anonymous person has sent. And that is what our focus is. We're not worried about who it sent it, because it's a Wieta member and the matter need to be addressed. So if the matter is of that nature where we see, though, this matter needs a direct visit to the farm so that we can discuss this matter and iron out the situation there, this is how we do it. And when we do that, we have what we call in Wieta a remedial plan, which the farmer or seller or farm need to agree to in terms of, should we find violations of any form, then he or she need to agree to a plan that we put in place as what we call a corrective action measures that we are putting in place to correct the situation. So after we have done that, and based on what the outcome is, we will then go back to the complainant and inform the complainant of what is the status and what the farmer agreed to. And also the complainant will then know, and he or she also have the right to let us know if what we've agreed to is not taking place according to our investigation that we have done.
Now, Chirstone, for a wine farm or seller to be part of this ethical shift, what are the biggest challenges they face in implementing the Wieta standards? Is it about cost, changing long-distance practices, or something else entirely? And how does Wieta support them through this?
There's such a lot of cascading impacts locally, provincially, and globally in terms of the challenges. So if I could narrow it down, just in terms of some of our what we call salient risks. So risk areas such as, housing, poverty and inequality, climate change, precarious work. These are some of the areas, just a few areas where we've seen risk areas for the wine industry, but in broad agriculture, especially now looking at wine, what we can see is obviously shifts in terms of purchasing practices. So from an industry point of view, young people need to obviously purchase wine to ensure that there is obviously longevity of wine farms and cellars. What we've seen is younger generations not obviously getting into buying those wines, but I don't want to get into those technicalities. But from a Wieta standards perspective, that has a cascading impact on farms making profits and making ends meet. And that can have an impact, obviously, on livelihoods as well. So employees. So in between that, there's obviously of supply chain or value chain where things or risks and payments and a lot of decision making needs to happen. And a lot of it can influence that because of the economics behind, for example, the purchasing of wine globally, locally. And that has an impact, like I said, on your farm workers, on your farms and your sellers. And from our side at Wieta, what we've seen is beyond the standards risk. So we have the implementation of our standard, our 13 standards principles, which comprises of management systems up until social responsibility, housing, labor, occupational health and safety, freedom of association. So those things need to be in place on the ground. However, from a risk point of view, what we've seen is there are still areas where, for example, health and safety risks in this context, for example, chemical handling, or because they're not trained efficiently on how to do basic health and safety work within the context of a farm or a cellar, that may play a risk. For example, precarious work, so seasonality of work, that can also be a risk because you have what we call labor brokers, temporary employment service providers that provide seasonal work for the farms via a service level agreement. And within the confines of that agreement, farms need to ensure that the temporary employment service provider is paying minimum wage, for example, providing a contract like we spoke about, a payslip for the farm worker. So that can all have an impact on, for example, what we have in terms of the WITA audit. And with that in mind, that plays a risk in terms of what we call the assurance letter. Used to be certification, but we focus now on assurance because the risk can happen anywhere. So from our side, we see a couple of those salient area risks as a concern, but also on the ground, there are quite a few other areas of concern, like I mentioned now, with precarious work, housing, health and safety risks. So that's why it's important for us, and I think it's important for farms and sellers to know, in order to be compliant, you've got to ascertain where your risks lie and where things can happen, because it can have an impact, what we call the assurance or the old certification. Because when you are trading overseas, for example, they are looking for a particular grading in terms of that assurance, be it an A, B, or C, per our WITA risk grading on our certificates or what we call assurance letters. But what we need to ascertain is that compliance on the ground needs to happen first. And that needs to be echoed throughout the value chain. And once it's echoed throughout the value chain, from farm workers to your transport drivers, to your tractor drivers, to your temporary employment service providers, up until the contracts that you draw up, the service level agreements, if that's all in line, it does leave you in a better place in terms of that value chain compliance and overall sustainability. I would say from an economic point of view, there's obviously economic areas of concern globally and obviously trading, but we won't get into that. But just from a standards perspective, I would say those are some of the areas of concern that one needs to think about. And obviously changing the mindset of people's purchasing practices as well, to buy from a farm that you know is treating their workers well. That's very important. To change those mindsets and change those hearts as well is important too.
Looking beyond the individual farms, AB, what ripple effects are you seeing from the Fair and Safe Harvest campaign? For instance, are you noticing changes in the relationship between farm management and workers, or in the pride workers take in their products?
The Fair and Safe Harvest campaign has brought great relief and confidence in workers. We need to remember that the workers are mainly seasonally employed, but what we notice through this campaign, the workers feel safe, they understand their rights, they feel protective and have a positive approach towards their work. The relationship in the workplace is much better because workers, as I've said, know their rights, they know what is expected from them within the workplace, and they're also open to address any grievances with their line managers, which is employed where they are employed.
Lastly, this is for the both of you gentlemen. What is the ultimate vision for the Labour Desk and the campaign? If you could look 5 years into the future, what tangible change would you hope to see for a farm worker in the South African wine industry and for the reputation of our wines globally? Chirstone, maybe I'll start with you.
If I may, just looking at the next 5 to 10 years, what we want to see is that from a WITA perspective and from just a farm and a seller's perspective, the vision is that the farm workers can go to work each day, not with uncertainty, but with confidence, knowing their rights, feeling safe, being confident to bring a problem across to management. There's a trusted internal mechanism that is available for farm workers and for any employee to use when it comes to a complaint, a grievance they would like to raise before it goes out externally to a Wieta Labour Desk or to a CCMA or to the Department of Labour, the Department of Agriculture. We want our farm workers, employees, employers, management to have good, positive industrial relationships with one another, and that people will feel empowered to speak up And just in relation to our Fair and Safe Harvest campaign, also to empower seasonal workers during the harvest, so that reputation of, South African mines, especially when it comes to seasonality of work, that a lot of our workers can see we are an important part of this very big value chain. This has an impact on the brand of the farm and the seller. And what we want to do is, for every bottle of wine that gets purchased from anyone in the public or in this country or even abroad, we want people to attach that value in terms of this wine bottle was built off good industrial relationships between farm workers and management. And throughout that value chain, free of risks and good industrial relationships, as I mentioned, social dialogue between all levels of stakeholders. And I mean, this doesn't have to just be farm worker and seller. It can be a trade union, for example, civil society, the public, anyone of concern to come and speak to a farm worker with regards to grievance or management, regards to a complaint, to have good industrial relationships. So we value that, and it's part of our values to ensure that we recognize positive industrial relationships among our members and the very valuable farm workers and management that puts their time and resources into every bottle. But beyond that, we would also like to see that internally there are mechanisms that are sustainable to drive those positive actions.
Maybe you can come in now.
I can just concur with what Chirstone have said. The last point which I just want to bring across is our vision as a Labour Desk is always to see that we build a collective understanding amongst farm workers, sellers, producers, and farmers to allow workers in terms of having the freedom to have internal mechanisms which is already there within certain companies, but also that workers make oftenly use of that mechanisms. Because I think we want to see that any complaint that comes to the table from the worker side need to have a mechanism where it can be addressed. We would like also to see that workers organize themselves into their workers' committees or any type of organization which they feel comfortable with, but that the sector be open to the mere fact that situations that is worker and employer related, they need to be an avenue of a platform where they can discuss and enhance their industry through such platforms. We need to remember that buyers of our wines is looking at what is happening within that particular seller or farm in terms of the needs of the workers. And we must always keep that in mind to know that if people in the workplace is having the freedom to associate, the freedom to move, and they know their rights, then we will build industry that will have great reputation and will be seen as the standard is set for those workers, and everybody within the industry, workers and employers, will be better off in terms of building a uniqueness amongst themselves, especially when it comes to relationships within the workplace.
And that was Chirstone Hornsby, who is Programs Manager of Standards and Stakeholder Engagement at Wieta, as well as Abraham Daniels, who is Labour and Projects Coordinator at the Wieta Labour Desk. This is Farmers Inside Track, and this episode was brought to you by Wieta. Thank you for listening and keep growing with us.